This is Newsday on Babita Sharma in Singapore. The headlines. The former director of the FBI, James Comey, has told the BBC that he doesn't believe there is anyone around Donald Trump who can contain him.
You'd have to think about it in a way you probably wouldn't have with other presidents.
After 6 decades of the Castros, there's a new leader in Cuba. President Miguel Diaz-Canel promises to continue communist rule in the country.
And I'm Nuala McGovern in London, also in the programme. Drowning in plastic, how the world's waterways are being clogged by bags and bottles which will never disintegrate.
I'm in Indonesia, where there's so much plastic waste choking the rivers that the army has been called in to help.
And acting the baddie in Korea, why foreign actors are looking to South Korean soap operas for their big break.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. It's 8 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in New York, where James Comey, the former director of the FBI, continues to spill the beans on his dealings with President Donald Trump. An interview for the BBC Newsnight programme. James Comey, who was fired by Mr. Trump, says he actually feels sorry for the president. Here's some of what he had to say in an interview with the BBC's Emily Maitlis.
If you were still a director of the FBI, would you be saying there is stuff I do not want to share with the US president right now because he will leak it and that is too dangerous for our national security?
Potentially. You'd have to be very careful about that because you have an obligation under our Constitution and the structure of our government to make sure the president has the information the president needs. And so you'd have to, it's hard to answer that in the abstract, but you'd have to think about it in a way you probably wouldn't have with other presidents.
James Comey there, while our correspondent Chris Buckler in Washington explained more about the impact of this interview.
I think this is the latest in a series of James Comey interviews in which the political has certainly given way to the personal. There is a real feeling from James Comey's point of view as he relates his experiences of dealing with Donald Trump that he does not respect the man. That's another question. He said it wasn't a case of disliking him, it was a case of disliking his actions. And fundamentally in this interview with Newsnight, he focused time and time again on the question of Donald Trump's behaviour, raising concerns that it was, in his words, corrosive, it was staining, it did damage to those people around him. All things that are pretty extraordinary, and given that James Comey has been saying these kind of things, it's worth just remembering it's pretty extraordinary to have a former head of the FBI saying that about a serving US president. Yes, he was fired, but he says he still has concerns about Donald Trump's behaviour, including his postings on Twitter when he wakes up in the morning.
Well, I wake up some mornings and read the president is demanding the jailing of private citizens, occasionally me, and so that's one of the reasons I'm confident the answer is there are not adequate people around him to stop impulsive behavior. And we've actually become numb to it in the United States. Our president calling for the imprisonment of private citizens.
A lot of mileage in this, I suppose, Chris, because he's been doing the rounds, hasn't he? I wonder what your assessment is now of what happens to him after this.
I think from James Comey's point of view, what we certainly saw in this particular interview is a step away from wanting to be personal about Donald Trump. He is trying to make this a lot more about a question of leadership, a question of politics, and a question of how a president should act. In previous interviews, for example, he's talked about Donald Trump's tan and Donald Trump's hands and Donald Trump's hair, which is, I have to say, in his book as well, but a small section of the book. He is trying to really look at President Trump's leadership. There is also that thorny issue of Robert Mueller, the special counsel's investigation, which continues to go on as we have these interviews out there. And I suppose there is a very careful tightrope for James Comey to walk here. and that is to make his own presence felt, to say what he has concerns about, but not to interfere with that investigation taking place by the special counsel. He's already made clear in some of the interviews that there are things he cannot say, for example. And it is worth remembering that even at this juncture, Donald Trump still is being asked questions. For example, he was asked questions just yesterday about whether or not he would fire Robert Mueller, for example. Questions which he's not answering directly. Although it is worth saying that here in America, the Washington Post is reporting that Rudy Giuliani, the former New York mayor, has now been appointed to Donald Trump's own personal legal team. And in an interview with the Washington Post, Rudy Giuliani said, in his view, he was there to try to bring to an end the Mueller investigation. It doesn't look like it's going to end, and certainly the questions about Donald Trump aren't either.
Thanks very much to Chris Buckler in Washington, D.C. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other news. Cuba has a new president, and for the first time in 6 decades, he's not one of the Castro family. Miguel Diaz-Canel, sworn in at the National Assembly a few hours ago, as you can see. Now, he is a staunch ally of the outgoing president, Raul Castro, and he says he has a mandate to continue the Cuban revolution. As our correspondent in Havana, Will Grant, explains, relations between the U.S. have deteriorated since Donald Trump came to power.
Miguel Diaz-Canel inherits an island that is so far removed on one level, the place that was in a sort of very good relationship between President Obama and President Raul Castro. That has sort of almost been forgotten now. It's so rocky that we know that the embassy here has been all but closed. I mean, it's still open, so there are still diplomatic ties, but it's virtually unstaffed. There was this strange episode with the 20 or so US diplomats with various ailments that they say are the health attacks that may or may not have been carried out by the Cubans. The Cubans roundly deny that. Things are at a very low ebb. What we do know is that President Trump made reference to the new president here when he was asked about him, and he said, "We love Cuba and we want to help them." What exactly that means, we don't know, of course, and quite what Mr. Diaz-Canel intends to do with Washington is also very, very murky still.
Thanks to Will for that. Also making news today, international experts have still to enter the Syrian town of Douma to investigate a suspected chemical weapons attack there. Their mission was delayed on Tuesday when an advanced UN team said it came under small arms fire. Now, the US Defense Secretary has suggested the Syrian regime may have brought about the delays on purpose in order to tamper with evidence. Minnesota prosecutor has said there is not enough evidence to bring criminal charges against anyone over the death of the musician Prince. The singer died from an opioid overdose at his Paisley Park complex near Minneapolis 2 years ago. The official cause of death was self-administered overdose of the painkiller fentanyl, but no prescriptions were found. Humans are able to adapt genetically to make them better deep-sea divers. This is according to scientists studying nomadic seafarers in Indonesia. They found that Bajau people have developed spleens 50% bigger than those of their neighbours who live on land, and it means they've more oxygen in their bodies, allowing them to dive to the depths of around 70 metres and hold their breath for up to 30 minutes underwater. Now, if you've ever moved home and perhaps you've struggled to put together your new furniture, take a look at this. A robot, 2 arms, developed at a university in Singapore, and its inventors claim it can put together an IKEA dining chair, just like this one, in under 9 minutes. Now, they haven't said how long it takes the average human to put the same chair together, but we're thinking it's probably a little bit longer.
Now, get ready for some staggering images. Plastic bags and bottles are cheap, convenient and durable. In fact, they're virtually indestructible. And that's giving the world a big headache. More than 8 million tons of plastic enter the sea every year. And in Indonesia, pollution is so bad that the government has deployed the army to deal with the problem. Our science editor, David Shukman, has more.
Soldiers hack away at a dense mass of plastic waste. It's hard to believe, but this is actually a river, and they're trying to clear it up. You can just see the water underneath all the bags, containers and bottles. This is Bandung, one of many Indonesian cities choking in so much waste that the army's been called in. For the military, plastic is a new and strange kind of enemy. This looks like a rubbish dump. It certainly smells like one. But what's striking is that this massive accumulation of plastic is happening on Indonesia's rivers, despite the country making a huge effort for several years now to tackle it. It just shows you the staggering scale of the problem. All the time that the soldiers are at work, the flow of the river brings yet more plastic waste. It's a constant struggle for the officials in charge. Do you think you're winning this battle against the plastic?
I think so. Yeah, we have to win. If not, this is very dangerous for our life.
But how long will it take you?
I'm sure within 10 years.
Within 10 years you could clear everything up?
Yes.
While we're filming, the soldiers realise they don't have enough trucks to carry away the waste. So they use a digger just to push it downstream. It's not exactly a long-term solution. And the plastic floats away to become someone else's problem. And part of that problem is that this landfill site is the only one Bandung has. The convoys of rubbish trucks collect just a fraction of the waste generated by several million people in the city. A new load is dumped. Flies swarm in the tropical heat. People rush to be first to search the rubbish. It's incredibly risky. Dodging an excavator. Someone died here recently. But ironically, they're after the very things that most people want to get rid of. A plastic bottle. Little by little, the message is spreading that recycling can create an income. In a village outside the city, this scheme is tiny, but it's one of many. And separating the different types of plastic earns a higher price. Experts say that a culture of just throwing things away is now changing.
I think particularly the young people here are very much aware of that they don't want to be part of this problem, and they want to have a future that is at least a plastic-free environment. So they're working hard for that.
But a view from the air reveals just how massive the challenge is. Plastic dumped close to the river soon finds its way into the water and then downstream. And down at the coast, a fishing village looks like it's drowning in plastic. The children here are growing up surrounded by the stuff. It's depressing evidence of how much still needs to be done to clear up. So what begins as a local problem of failing to handle waste turns into a global one as the oceans fill with plastic. David Shukman, BBC News, Indonesia.
Those pictures are really quite something. Let me turn to Queen Elizabeth. She has hosted a banquet at Buckingham Palace here in London for leaders of the Commonwealth. Now, she's presided over the leaders' two-yearly meeting, or CHOGM as it's sometimes called. Earlier, Queen Elizabeth, who's 92, made the case for her son Prince Charles to take over from her as the next head of the Commonwealth when the time comes.
It is my sincere wish that the Commonwealth will continue to offer stability and continuity for future generations, and will decide that one day the Prince of Wales should carry on the important work started by my father in 1949. By continuing to treasure and reinvigorate our associations and activities, I believe we will secure a safer, more prosperous and sustainable world for those who follow us.
Now, you may not know it, but the Asia-Pacific region has the second highest prevalence of HIV in the world. More than 5.1 million people in the region live with the virus, and around 270,000 people are infected with HIV each year. The good news is that the annual number of new HIV infections in the region has dropped 13% over the 6 years to 2016. There were steep reductions in Thailand, Vietnam and Myanmar. But unfortunately, there have been big increases in some countries, including the Philippines, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. John Hackett, who is a researcher focusing on HIV infection in Asia. I began by asking him how having many different types of the virus poses difficulties when it comes to screening patients.
The issue with HIV and hepatitis viruses like hepatitis B and hepatitis C is that the genetic diversity is extremely high, and these viruses evolve at a very rapid rate. So the concern is, or the challenge that poses to diagnostic tests or blood screening tests, is that if the virus mutates or new strains emerge that are very diverse, they may not be detected accurately or reliably by these tests. And so it was recognizing this problem and our concerns with the diversification of HIV and hepatitis that more than 20 years ago we created the Abbott Viral Surveillance Program with the overarching goal of being able to monitor the diversification of the virus globally and to ensure that the tests that we create could reliably detect all of the strains, because every strain is literally a plane ride away from somewhere else.
I mean, that's so scary when you put it like that, but of course this surveillance program, I would imagine, is a global one, given the fact that it affects everybody. So why look at this region in particular?
Well, we've turned to Asia-Pac just from a very practical reality that nearly half the world's population are in the Asia-Pacific region. And as you pointed out, there's 5.1 million individuals infected with HIV. And when we look at hepatitis C virus, even if you look at just India and China together, it's estimated anywhere from 16 to 22 million people infected with that. Hepatitis B is even more severe in that between India and China alone, probably 130 million people have hepatitis B virus. And you know, you consider that's almost 40% of the entire global burden.
Dr. John Hackett there. You're watching Newsday live from Singapore and London, still to come on the programme. The foreign actors heading to South Korea as the country's TV soap opera industry explodes onto the world stage.
Also on the programme, an Australian diving team gets a surprise when it finds an unknown shipwreck off the coast of Western Australia.
Welcome back. You're with Newsday on the BBC. Thanks for joining us. I'm Babita Sharma in Singapore.
And I'm Nuala McGovern in London. Our top stories. Former FBI Director James Comey speaks to the BBC and says he'd think twice about sharing sensitive information with President Trump.
There's a new president in Cuba and he says communism will continue after 6 decades of the Castros. And the African nation that was known as Swaziland has a new name. The country's king declaring it will now be called the Kingdom of Eswatini. It comes on the 50th anniversary of Swazi independence. More on that story, which is popular, on bbc.com. Now let's take a look at what is making the headlines for a Friday morning in the newspapers around the world. And we begin with the Japan Times, which is leading on the meeting, that 2-day meeting between US President Trump and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It says, while President Abe is plagued with his own scandals back home, at least he has some kind of success in the United States, with the two countries agreeing to keep maximum pressure on North Korea to denuclearize. Moving on to the Gulf News, which is focusing on a long-awaited military arms export deal. The article goes on to talk about how America has rolled out a new policy aimed at boosting arms sales to its allies and cutting the time it takes to approve those arms deals. This is the front page of Le Figaro in France this morning, and it's talking about Emmanuel Macron, the president's controversial labour reforms. It's blighting him at the moment. It features this centre picture here of the president being confronted by railway workers, pensioners and angry citizens in Vosges. There he's trying to explain, attempting to, those reforms to locals in the area. Nuala, that's the way the papers are shaping up this morning. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Babita. Well, let's take a few minutes with a mapping team that has made a surprise discovery of a shipwreck off the coast of Western Australia. Now, scientists had a shock when a large mystery structure appeared on their screen as they were mapping the ocean floor with sonar. Sent a camera down to investigate, and lo and behold, it was a sunken ship. The wreck is thought to date from after 1900, but more than that, nobody really knows. Miles Parson is one of the research scientists who was there the moment when the shipwreck was discovered.
It was particularly exciting. As you said, we were out mapping the seafloor and the habitat with a sonar system on the boat, and then literally out of the blue, a structure appeared on screen which we weren't expecting.
And I just mentioned briefly it's a shipwreck. Can you tell us anything more about where it might have come from or what it might have looked like?
Well, it's very much intact. Certain parts of the superstructure are still there. Apart from that, it's a 37-metre long vessel, and it's sort of between 6 and 7 metres wide. But we've passed on all of the details, as you mentioned, to the WA Museum, who are going to be taking it further in terms of the identification.
So what happens? Does it stay down there?
Yes, it likely will stay down there. Depends on what actually the outcome is from the WA Museum. If it did turn out to be a historic wreck, then they will take more action and investigate. If not, then they'll take it from there as well. And the Australian Maritime Society will decide as to what kind of indication needs to be given to mariners.
This particular area, though, when you get into Western Australia, particularly outside Perth, there have been a number of shipwrecks found, right?
Yes, and there's likely to be a fair few more out there, from ranging right back from the expeditions coming over here and the Dutch vessels in the 1600s. But yes, it's a fairly unusual find for me.
Miles Parsons there speaking to Nuala a little earlier. Now, South Korean TV soap operas have taken the world by storm, but how easy is it for foreign actors to make it big in the K-drama industry? We've been speaking to some foreign actors in South Korea to find out more.
악동 없는 이야기는 재미없잖아. As a foreign actor, if you think you're going to just stand out automatically in Korea, then you're absolutely wrong.
So I feel like it's like I'm an outcast or not included. I'm Carson Allen. I'm 22 years old and I'm aspiring foreign actress in Korea. The first Korean drama I watched was Boys Over Flowers. I wanted to follow a passion that I have for acting, but in a Korean drama. Unfortunately, a lot of times us foreigners here, we're put into a stereotype that we can only be an English teacher or in a business meeting, or if that particular character went abroad and they're filming as if it was another country, then that's the only time we'll be used. Thanks again. Bye. We filmed through the night in filming pools here in Korea, and in the end, you probably didn't see me.
문화를 담잖아요, 드라마는. 그렇기 때문에 결국에는 그야말로 외국 연기자들은 외국 연기자들이에요. 그 외국인으로 나오죠. 생김새에서부터 외국인이고 말도 그러니까 언어적인 한계도 있고 그들이 한국어를 정확하게 한다고 해도 그들은 외국인이에요.
I am leaving my country. Passport in hand, visa in hand, and I'm going to a place where I don't speak the language, no one looks like me. This is the most nerve-wracking thing I have ever done. Being a foreign actor in Korea is extremely fulfilling. However, it is a lot of work. I've done an American representative, a tourist husband, I played a thug. It's been all over the map for me here in Korea. And that has been because of my image, because of how I presented myself. Like this. Because that's where you'll get your present, that's why. Asian faces all around you. And you're not going to just stand out just because you're the foreigner. You got to do something unique.
So, a whole other film industry. And before we go, let's take a look at these pictures for you. These are from London today, where there was such a heat wave. 27 degrees Celsius, which is not usual for us at this time of year. So people decided to enjoy it. Thanks very much from me and Babita in Singapore.